A Microsoft employee in sales waits in early July for a cut the company has not yet confirmed. 2 floors up, in a spreadsheet nobody there sees, the same company's capital budget adds billions more for the same stretch. Most people read one of those numbers and never see the other. You rarely see them side by side. One document could end a job. The other funds a data center. Fortune placed both developments inside the same report, and together they reveal a larger shift in how major technology companies are allocating money. Start with the plain arithmetic behind what companies now brand AI automation. Microsoft's calendar year 2026 capital spending sits near $190 billion, a 61% jump from the prior year, even as the company prepared to cut jobs again in July, on top of 6,000 roles removed in May 2025 and 9,000 more that same July. Alphabet raised its own 2026 range twice within 6 months, first to a high of $190 billion, then, after second quarter results, to $205 billion. 3 questions sit underneath every headline about job cuts this year, and none of them has a clean answer yet. The first is mechanical. Are companies reducing operating costs tied to headcount while directing more of their available capital toward infrastructure? Public filings can show both movements happening at the same time, but they cannot usually prove that a specific dollar saved through a layoff was transferred directly into a specific data center. The causal question is harder. Did artificial intelligence directly replace the workers who lost their jobs, or did something else drive the decision, with AI providing a convenient explanation afterward? The structural question is harder still. Is 2026 a one-year adjustment inside a normal business cycle, or a permanent shift in how a technology company chooses to grow? Executives describe the relationship between rising infrastructure spending and tighter operating costs in unusually direct language this year, more direct than in prior downturns. Fortune's reporting on Microsoft framed the coming cuts as ordinary cost control, pointing to AI spending that consumes an ever larger share of the company's available budget each quarter. That does not prove that infrastructure spending caused a particular layoff, but it does show that executives are discussing workforce costs and AI investment as competing priorities inside the same corporate strategy. Companies that once blamed vague market conditions now increasingly name the destination of their next investment cycle, and that destination is compute capacity. The pattern recurring across earnings calls is a widening gap between 2 major corporate allocations: operating expenses tied to headcount, shrinking or remaining relatively flat at several major firms, and capital expenditure directed toward infrastructure, rising faster than revenue in more than one case this year. Alphabet's own capital spending in the second quarter of 2026 reached $44.9 billion, 100% higher than a year earlier, even as free cash flow turned negative for the period. A payroll reduction and a capital increase can appear inside the same earnings release without contradiction because they affect different parts of a company's financial structure. Headcount costs generally affect operating expenses. Capital expenditures appear primarily through investment cash flows and the assets added to the balance sheet, with their costs reaching the income statement gradually through depreciation. That distinction matters because companies can reduce one category of spending while accelerating another, even when both decisions are being made under the same financial pressure. That is the paradox worth examining, not as spectacle, but as a reallocation now playing out at unprecedented scale. Reuters reported in February that major technology companies had outlined roughly $600 billion in combined 2026 capital spending, a figure investors greeted with unease rather than applause that week. Shares of Amazon slid 7% in a single session after its $200 billion outlay was disclosed, while Alphabet lost 3% after signaling that capital spending could double for the year ahead. That reaction mattered because it showed markets treating capital expenditure, not layoff headlines, as the variable capable of moving a stock price overnight. AI automation is the label companies increasingly use for the software layer riding on top of that spending, and it is one reason infrastructure investment keeps climbing rather than leveling off after each earnings cycle. Fortune's technology desk reported on July 1st that Microsoft was preparing another round of cuts, smaller than 2.5% of its 220,000-person workforce, touching sales and consulting teams this time. The report also placed Microsoft's calendar year capital spending near $190 billion, up 61% from the previous year's actual total. Wall Street's specific worry, the report noted, was that AI could eventually replace some of the software services Microsoft sells directly to enterprise customers, an irony sitting quietly inside the spending itself. Could the tool replacing parts of human work also weaken parts of the business model funding it? Alphabet's July earnings call offered the clearest numbers available for how quickly this investment cycle is accelerating. Chief Financial Officer Anat Ashkenazi told analysts the company was updating its full-year 2026 capital expenditure guidance to a range of $195 billion to $205 billion, up from the previous estimate of $180 billion to $190 billion. Cloud revenue for the quarter grew 82% to $24.8 billion, and the cloud backlog rose $50 billion in a single quarter to $514 billion. Chief Executive Sundar Pichai called the moment very early innings, language that reads as confidence from inside the building and as risk from almost anywhere outside it, especially to anyone studying the capital expenditure line rather than the revenue line. None of this spending or cutting happens inside a vacuum, disconnected from what workers themselves expect. The World Economic Forum's scenario, Work on AI and Talent, published in January, found that more than half of surveyed business executives worldwide expect the technology to displace existing jobs, while under a quarter expect it to create new ones outright during the same period. Roughly 45% separately expect higher profit margins from that identical technology. Executives are not necessarily predicting that every displaced worker will be directly replaced by a model, but many are clearly expecting AI to improve margins while reducing the need for at least some categories of labor. Three comparisons make the scale of this shift concrete rather than abstract. The first is Microsoft's capital trajectory. Roughly $190 billion is planned for calendar 2026, representing a 61% increase over the prior year's actual spending. The important point is not an unsupported comparison with Microsoft's entire historical cloud build-out. It is the speed at which a mature company is expanding infrastructure spending from an already enormous base. The second benchmark sits inside Alphabet's 2 guidance revisions in 1 calendar year. The company told investors in April that its 2026 ceiling was $190 billion. By July, after another quarter of cloud demand, that ceiling had moved to $205 billion. The $15 billion increase was attributed explicitly to an acceleration in the delivery of capacity. That does not mean customer demand was unchanged or irrelevant. It means the company decided that its ability to bring new infrastructure online had become urgent enough to justify another upward revision. Guidance revised upward twice. Inside consecutive quarters is not the pattern of a company quietly hedging its bets. It reads like a company racing to expand capacity before competitors or customers move faster than expected. The third benchmark is executive sentiment measured against executive action at the same calendar moment. The World Economic Forum found a majority of global executives already expecting AI to displace jobs sometime before 2030, a forecast horizon spanning several years and built from surveys rather than from any single company's internal budget. Yet Alphabet's capital decisions moved on the horizon of a single fiscal quarter, twice, inside the same year. The stated timeline for labor disruption and the actual pace of infrastructure investment are not running at the same speed. The gap between a multi-year workforce forecast and a quarterly budget revision is exactly where displaced workers currently stand, waiting for clarity that has not arrived from either side. Reuters' February reporting also captured the market's broader concern. Roughly $1 trillion in software sector value evaporated inside a single week, driven by fear that AI automation could substitute for entire categories of enterprise software, not merely for individual roles inside a handful of technology companies. That is a materially different scale of disruption than one ordinary earnings cycle usually produces. None of this proves that artificial intelligence is the sole or even the primary, cause behind every job eliminated this year. Companies describing layoffs as efficiency and reallocation use language broad enough to cover ordinary cost discipline just as easily as genuine AI substitution. Is that framing sincere or merely convenient? Microsoft's July round, according to Fortune's reporting, touched sales and consulting functions where AI tooling plays an uneven role at best, and where Wall Street pressure over margins, not any specific model capability, may be the more immediate driver of the decision. Pandemic-era overhiring also remains a live explanation that industry analysts have not abandoned, whatever companies say publicly. Firms that expanded headcount rapidly through 2021 were always likely to correct at least part of that expansion eventually, with or without generative tools arriving to provide a new explanation for the adjustment. Distinguishing genuine AI substitution from a delayed correction dressed in newer language requires evidence most layoff announcements simply do not provide. A press release rarely specifies which function a machine actually replaced, which role was eliminated through restructuring, and which position disappeared because management wanted a lower cost base. Sources also disagree sharply on basic definitions. What counts as a technology layoff, whether percentage announcements convert cleanly into headcounts, and whether global or United States only figures apply, all vary by tracker and by each company's disclosure practices. That methodology gap makes any single cross-company total difficult to defend with confidence. The World Economic Forum's framing also treats AI's net employment effect as a range of possible outcomes rather than a settled fact, spanning scenarios from widespread augmentation to significant displacement depending on how quickly workers, companies, and institutions adapt. What is verifiable without much dispute is the capital side of the ledger. Alphabet and Microsoft have publicly disclosed rapidly rising infrastructure spending, and both have revised or expanded those commitments within a single calendar year. What cannot be established from those figures alone is that the Microsoft employee bracing for a cut is being replaced by a model, or that the salary attached to that role will directly finance a particular server rack. That remains a company-by-company and role-by-role question, rather than a settled industry-wide verdict anyone can cite with confidence. Return to that possible July cut, and the spreadsheet 2 floors up that nobody in the department ever saw. One document, once confirmed, could end a career. The other could begin another decade of infrastructure investment worth hundreds of billions of dollars, with returns that have not yet fully arrived. AI automation may eventually justify every dollar of that infrastructure bet, or it may not, and no earnings call has settled that question yet. The verdict on individual causation stays open, company by company, worker by worker. The verdict on corporate priorities is clearer. Major technology companies are increasing the share of capital directed toward machines and infrastructure, while placing greater pressure on the operating costs associated with human labor. That does not prove a direct transfer from every lost job to every new data center. But it does show where companies believe the next phase of growth will come from. Facts over fear.